Eric Holt-Gime nez. He's been executive director of Food First since 2006. He's trained as an agroecologist and political economist. His work is informed by 25 years of work in Central America with the farmer-to-farmer movement, campesino a campesino. He speaks and writes about the power of social movements to create social change with books like Food Rebellions and Food Movements Unite.
I'm definitely not the same person today that I was before I came to Food First, but I think that Food First has that transformative effect on all of us. So I was looking at some videos from this conference called Food for Tomorrow. It's put on by the New York Times. And they bring together a number of experts from around the world, and they talk about the food system and the challenges that we face. And I was listening to the different presentations by these food experts. And I heard things like, hunger is the result of poverty, inequality, and injustice, not scarcity. And that agroecology and peasant agriculture and women feed the world. And about the benefits, the multiple social, economic, and environmental benefits of small farms. And then I heard about the superior climate resilience of agroecology that had been proven by a study done in Central America in which farmers measured the resilience of sustainable and conventional farms in the face of Hurricane Mitch, and found that sustainable farms were more resilient. And I realized I was listening to Food First. And I realized that not once was Food First ever mentioned. And I was very impressed. Because what I saw was that the breadth of discussion around food and development had gone from the productivism of 40 years ago and population control 40 years ago, to some very intelligent conversations about the food system and what was wrong and what were the real causes of hunger. And the academic questions, or what were academic questions 40 years ago, were now very much part of a progressive public lexicon. And I was impressed because I realized that Food First was among some of the research pioneers and the social movements that had generated the information and analysis that was informing the positions now so eloquently popularized by all these food celebrities. And then it hit me. At first I thought, well, why don't they even mention us? They're the ones getting famous, and we did all the work, along with many, many others, of course. But then I realized that sort of deep within the changing colors and the designs, that Food First was inextricably woven into this vast, ragged tapestry that we call the food movement. And then we had helped to shape it. And that we had indeed been shaping the conversation around food for 4 decades. And I realized this journey as a think tank. First we were called a think tank. The New York Times called us one of the most prominent think tanks on food. And then we started being called a people's think tank. And then we started being called a people's think and do tank. Because, as Syed Shyam pointed out, Food First is also on the ground. We're not just in the clouds. We don't just write books. We don't just do research and analysis. We're on the ground. We're in communities. We try to be a good neighborhood think tank here in the East Bay. We have the Seed Project in Mali. We have the Campesino Pollinator Project in Mexico. We helped to launch the Oakland Food Policy Council. Yes. And I want to thank Clif Bar, because they're supporting Food First, to work on a program called Urban Farmer Field Schools, in which urban farmers innovate and teach each other sustainable practices here in the East Bay to deal with their own issues of food security. So on this journey, we've very much gone, and I think you can see from the presentations tonight, from exploding the myths that cause hunger to ending the injustices that cause hunger, to aligning ourselves with the frontline communities and the social movements that are working to end the injustices, and not just the ones that cause hunger, but all injustices. So we've really gone from, as Frankie pointed out, originally we were called the Institute for Food and Development Policy, but when you shortened that to FDIP, it was called IFDIP. And so, thankfully, that was jettisoned for Food First. But we've gone from being a policy and media-centered sort of approach to addressing the issues of hunger and to exploding the myths around the causes of hunger, to become a movement-centered organization with a movement-centered strategy for social change and for transforming the food system. And this has really led to a very deep, committed, and organic engagement with social movements around the world, with the food sovereignty movement, with the food justice movement, with the community food security movement, with the labor justice movement, with the immigrant rights movement, with the climate justice movement, and with Black Lives Matter. And it can be no other way with Food First, because we are a radical organization, which means we go to the root. And so where are we today? And in which direction are we headed? I think it's already been mentioned about the diversity of Food First and the diversity of Food First Board of Directors and the tremendous experience and perspectives and richness that this diversity brings our organization. And Cheyenne also mentioned that this wasn't easy, that this took a lot of work. This has taken 15 years. Not 2 weeks. But we have indeed overcome the obstacles to be able to converge in all of our diversity. And so I think that the lessons from within Food First are also applicable to the food movement itself. Because one of the wonderful things about the food movement is its diversity. All the different forms it takes. All the different levels upon which it acts. Just how amorphous it is and how sort of maddening that can be when people try to describe it and give it direction. But what we realize that if we're going to be a powerful food movement, powerful enough to create the political will to actually not just reform, but transform this food system, that the food movement is going to have to learn to converge in all of its diversity. Now, we don't know how to do this. But as Rosalinda says, this is the path we need to walk together. And we make this road as we travel. Hacemos el camino al andar. Well, it's not easy. If it was, we would have already done it. Because there are some obstacles in our way. Some very serious obstacles in our way. And that's basically oppression and privilege. We have a number of oppressions. We have primarily white privilege. So in fact, those things which keep us from converging in all of our diversity, from being everything that we can be and need to be as a food movement, surround us. They're in the food system. The racism in the food system, the classism in the food system, the sexism in the food system. We have to dismantle all these things. But in order to do that, we have to dismantle them within our own movement. Which means we have to be extremely courageous. And we can't be afraid. We can't be afraid of the truth. We have to trust each other, and that's not easy. But the point is, this is not extra work. We don't somehow solve the problems of the food system on one hand, and then get to the racism and the classism and the sexism when we're ready. This is not extra work. This is not extra work for the food movement. This is the work. And one of the reasons it's so important for us to do this work in the food system, to dismantle racism, classism, and sexism, is that the food system and food is central to almost everything else. So one way to look at that is, gee, to transform this food system, we have to transform the whole system. That means we have to change everything. That's right. That's it. We do have to change everything. We cannot change the food system in isolation from everything else. But the good news is that the food system and the food movement can be a lever and is central to the social change of the larger food movement. We can eliminate privilege. We can eliminate oppression. We can build a food system and a society of liberation and compassion. We can do it together. Thank you very much.